Hey everybody, it's Kim over at Life Prepared. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I hope you consider subscribing. And to all of my subscribers, thank you so much for all of your love and support. One of my subscribers, Pam, has asked me to show her how I pressure can pre-cooked meat, okay? And today I'm going to be doing a pork roast. So I need to tell you the process of where I was prior to the pressure canning stage in the beginning of this video. But if you've already done this, your pork is cooked or your whatever, your chicken, your beef is cooked, I will post a link down below that tells you where to skip to just to see the canning process. All right, so I started with two large, they were about 8 pounds a piece, pork shoulder roast that I got on sale for 99 cents a pound. I took both of these pork roasts, they're pork shoulder roasts by the way, into my roaster. I did not add any water, but I generously salted, peppered, and onion powder and some garlic powder on top and on the sides of the roast. I then roasted them at 300 degrees because I wanted a slow roast until the instant read thermometer that I have read 145 degrees close to the bone but not touching it. Once that was done, I took one pork shoulder roast and I shredded it. Excuse me. I shredded it. We use for barbecue pork sandwiches, pork carnitas, and things like that. That one was frozen. The second one I want to make shelf stable to use, in case, we have an issue where I could use it if I have to. I could eat it fresh out of the can and not even warm it. Okay? It could also be used for the carnitas and other recipes as well. This one I am going to cube just because that's my preference. All right. So I took that second roast, I cooled it, I put it in my refrigerator overnight. I then took the juices that the pork loin roast had developed, which was quite a bit. I put those in a large bowl, cooled those, and I refrigerated that as well overnight. My reasoning for that is I want to remove a lot of the excess fat. There's still plenty of fat left on the pork. So I refrigerate overnight, and then I could scoop off the layer of the fat that rises to the top and hardens. It's very easy to do. Underneath, the juices were kind of gelatinous, kind of like a loose Jell-O consistency. You could still use a spoon to pick it up, but it falls apart pretty easy. The juices, once skimmed, went into my crock pot, which is back there on the counter. And then I took the meat and I scraped off a lot of the excess fat. I'm not going to explain that whole process. I did a quick video on that. I will post that in the description box as well. It's a very quick, easy way to remove the excess fat once it's been cooked and cooled. Then I cubed up my pork and I put that in my crock pot as well. I'm a late night person, so this was close to midnight last night when I got done. And I put that on low overnight and let it go for the canning process because I'm doing hot pack meat. Once the meat is cooked, I always hot pack it. All right, so that's the basic process. We'll get into the canning process next, and I'll take you over to my stove and I'll show you my setup and things like that. But I just wanted everybody to know this process of how I got here. All right, so let's move on. All right, I'm going to show you the canning process starting with my pressure canner. This is the lid to it over here, and there's my weight. This top here just happens to fit perfect while I'm warming everything up. All right, so in here I have my jars. My manufacturer recommends 2 inches of water. I use 2 inches for pints, 3 inches for quarts because they take longer to cook. Each jar, I put a little bit of that water in here because I'm going to warm these up. Anytime you're putting hot food into a jar, you want everything hot, okay? Because the last thing you want to do is shock your jars and have the bottoms pop off and you lose all that meat or product that you put in here, and it makes a huge mess in your canner. So I'm going to let these all warm up together until I need them, and then I'll take out a few at a time. The rest of the things I need I have here on my countertop, and forgive me, I usually forget something. Oh, back here I'll start with, I have a small pan of water that I'm going to get simmering once I need it. I have much better luck with warming my lids to make sure that that seal is a little bit soft. I tend to buy my lids, I could have bought them 3 or 4 years ago. I get them when they go on clearance somewhere. All right, so I still do that process. I also, over here, I have hanging, because I like to keep it clean, my ladle. That's going to be when I put the juices into my jars. Of course, I have my funnel. You can get these. This is a collapsible one. Sometimes they come plastic, they come metal. Whatever type of funnel that works best for you, that has a large opening to let the meat go through easily. I have my rings. I have my lids. In this process, you definitely need a jar lifter. If you do not have one, Ball sells a little kit that has most everything you need in it. I have my ring. This will lift my lids out of the hot water for me. That came in the kit, as well as a different funnel. I have my rings, and then I'm going to be putting the meat in using my spider. And then you need something to debubble. I prefer a plastic knife, and for the life of me, I cannot find it. A plastic knife works really, really good, but like I said, I can't find it. And then I have some vinegar, which I will use later to wipe the rims off the jars. And you could put a little bit into your water, which helps the outside of your jars from discoloring. Other than that, I just need the product that I'm putting in, and today it will be pork cubes. Okay, I'm ready to get on with my process. You can see my water had just come to a boil. I did turn it off. I'm going to remove a couple of jars, put the lid back on top, because I do not want any of that water to evaporate. And another thing I brought out, just in case I do not have enough liquid, I brought out a jar of tomato juice that I canned a couple years ago, because you can flavor your meat if you choose, but you have to be very careful in doing that. And I'll explain that as we start putting the meat into the jars. And I moved my crock pot over to the sink on a trivet so that everything's handy. I have a very small kitchen, and it's just easier for me to scoop from here into the jars and then get the jars ready for the canner. All right, so our first step is going to be to carefully, remember there's water in these. You had to put a little water to keep them from floating. I'm going to very carefully pour off the excess water. And I'm going to remove 3 to 4 jars. It's just how I do it. I do not do all my jars at once, because they stay warm that way. And like I said, my countertop is small. It's just easier to do a few at a time. All right, so I'm going to do them in groups of 3s. My canner holds 9 pints. I'm not sure if I mentioned, I did in the intro, but if you skip to this point, I do pints because it works for our family. A pint holds approximately 1 pound of meat, and that's all that we use. There's only 3 of us here, all right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move these very carefully closer to my crock pot over here. I am going to start my lids simmering in the background. I don't want them boiling. I just want them to warm up and soften a bit. So I'm going to get those going now. There was no sense doing them way too early. And I'm going to start to ladle my meat into my jars. And you know what? It has gotten very tender, and you will see some of it is probably shredded a bit, and that's okay with me. Now, you're going up to just below, on my jars, just below this rim here, right where the, it's a little hot, right where the shoulder comes up, there, that's 1 inch of head space. So I'm going to do as close as I can without going over to that 1 inch of head space. You can always, you know, take some back out if you get too much, which I probably just did. I'm going to take my knife and just gently, I'm not forcing it, I'm just kind of moving it in the jar to make sure that it's within that head space, okay? You can see I'm not jamming it, I'm just gently moving it around. There we go. So we have my first jar filled. I'm going to fill these other 2, and then I will show you the next step. So I have all of my meat in there. I just see my lids came up to there. The water actually boiled while I wasn't paying attention, but that's okay. I turned it off because I don't need them any hotter than that. Now I'm going to take my ladle. I'm going to put the meat juices, some of the meat juices, carefully, into the jar, maintaining that head space. I do it slowly to allow it to trickle down between the pieces of meat. And then I'm going to, once again, take my knife and I'm going to debubble. Let me move this out of the way. I'm just gently, now this is where plastic comes in much better, just kind of making sure I go around the edge of the jar, excuse my hand, make sure there's no big bubbles because I need that liquid to come up to the top of this meat. I do go down the middle just a little bit, and then I also tap my jars. Okay, so it looks like I have the proper head space in here. My liquid has covered my meat, and I'm going to set that aside, and I'm going to fill my next jar. If you do not want to use the pork liquid, you could use hot water. You could use a stock. Chicken stock works very well with pork. Like I said, I would probably use some tomato juice. If you want to flavor your pork, it is safe to add dry spices and herbs. You do not want to use fresh because they haven't been tested. You don't know if there's botulism or anything on that. If you want to use say a barbecue, I have found that barbecue sauces tend to burn because of the processing time, more so with quarts than pints, but it just doesn't, it's not satisfactory to me. You could make a rub, but remember once again that if you use sugar on your rub, the sugars may burn and you might get that burnt flavor. So I would personally put that on after I've canned my meats and then maybe cook it for just a little bit, say for my pulled pork sandwiches or something on that order. Okay, so there we go. Now we've successfully debubbled our jars. We've filled them to where they need to go. And now I need to get my vinegar and wipe the rims of my jars. Okay, usually, like I said, I probably would forget a small piece of equipment. I like to keep a small extra jar that I can set my funnel on so I don't pick up lint or, in my case, cat or dog hair. And it just keeps it clean. So I took a paper towel and it's wet with the vinegar. Especially with meat products, you want to carefully wipe this rim off. You do not want any fat particles of meat or anything else on the outside of your jars. It's just, you should do this on all of your jars. Okay? Now I realized as I was filling my jars, I probably do not have enough to do 9 pints. So I have on my stove warming, I still had some that did not fit in my crock pot, in the tomato juice in case I need it. But regardless, I'm going to can those as well, whether I have to do a separate batch or not. And I knew they would not warm up enough in the crock pot. So unless they're completely warm, I'm not going to use those right now. All right, the next step, as you see, put on your lids. This is my preferred method, and you may need something. Your jars are going to be quite hot. I find I could hold them with a paper towel. I like to put my lids on. I put them on all the way, and then I crank it back about a little over an eighth to a quarter of a turn, because you have to allow that air to escape from that jar. Okay, I put it on, I turn it back. Finger tight to me. I get it all different tightnesses. I've had jars fail. This works best for me. Find what works best for you. All right, so those 3 jars are done. I'm going to put them into my canner. Let me move you over here for a brief second. To make it easier to get jars out after, I'm going to remove one of my jars. Pour off that liquid. And I'm going to just place these in the canner. It keeps them warm, so I don't have to worry about it cooling off too much. Right, let me grab my next jar. And usually by the time I fill my jars, the water's evaporated out of those. You want to put them in here kind of close together to get all 9, but you don't want them like clinging up against each other or tinking on each other, whatever you want to call it. All right, so I have my next 3 jars out. I can put my lid on and keep everything warm and keep the excess water from coming out. And then I just start that process all over again. I will fill my jars. I will lightly pack the meat down to within my head space here. Then I will put my liquid in there. Wipe them off very carefully with the vinegar. Put my lids and my rings on, and I'm going to continue to fill my canner. Before I finish filling this jar, let me show you real quick. I prefer to put them at the bottom, but I didn't think of it until I got this jar half full. You can add your dried spices and herbs to your taste. We happen to like a lot of onion, so I'm just going to put some onion in here just to show you could do this. I did not add any salt to my jars simply because I salted my pork very well. You could add some salt as well if you have not, if you need it. And then I could put a little bit of thyme in here. And let's see what else I have in my cabinet above my head. How about some garlic powder? I'm going to add just a little bit of paprika. Okay. So I add some paprika and so on and so on. If you like it spicy, add some chili powder or hot pepper, or something like that. But I just wanted to show you briefly that you can add these type of powders. And when I put the lid on, I'm going to show you how I mark it so that I know that this jar is different from everything else in the canner. Okay, this is something you may come up against. As you can see, my meat does not fully fill this jar. I have 2 options here. I could put this in a half-pint jar, which will get the same processing time as the pints, or I cannot worry about it. I could fill this up and know that my meat is probably going to float in this jar. I think I'm going to warm up a half pint. Just works out for me. I have recipes like maybe a pork fried rice that I can use less meat in, and I could save my larger jars for something else. So I'm going to warm up one of those half pint jars and repack this. While I'm waiting for my jar to cool, or to warm, I should say, I got a little heavy-handed with the broth in this jar, and you could see I'm not at my head space. So I'm going to use a spoon, it's easy enough, to dip off some of that excess broth. So I'm just trying to show you, if you make a little mistake, it's not the end of the world. You don't have to pour your whole jar out. I knew I had the right amount of meat. I just added a little bit too much liquid. So I want to get that down my proper headspace, okay? There. All right, simple. Okay, I did the usual with my jars. I wiped the rims with the vinegar. I put my lids on, my bands. I made sure they were tight, and then I backed them off. Now this is the one that has all those spices in here. You may not know this. It does fade some, but I can write spiced or whatever word. Oop, I don't know how to spell. Spiced pork. At least some of that word is going to stay on there until I get all of my jars done. I had a tiny bit of pork left. I know in my canner if I could fit 2 of these in place of 1 pint into the middle. So if I need to, I can pull out another half pint if I would like. On my stove, I have that other pork that was in my refrigerator left over because it did not fit in my crock pot. That is fully warmed through. So the rest of my jars are going to be filled with that mixture. I'm not sure how many jars I'm going to get because it wasn't a lot of pork. In the bottom of these jars, I want these to be spiced a bit. I put onion, garlic, paprika, and just a little bit of chili powder. Like I said, you can use your dry spices, and I will have to label this a little bit different from the one I called spicy pork. But this is going to be a tomato spicy pork. Now these are not quite as tender as the last batch, so the cubes may stay pretty much in cubes on this one. I think I have enough to do 2 jars here. But you can see the meat is less falling apart in these jars. So I can push my meat down just a tad. I'm going to put some of my meat in the other one just to make sure I have kind of equal. Or if I think I can transfer it to a half pint, I will. I don't think so, but we shall see, right? I'm not jamming them. I'm just trying to maneuver them around a little bit. I don't want to necessarily chop up the meat. If it, if it falls apart on its own, it is okay with me. This jar I'm filling currently had that little bit of leftover from the previous. I'm just going to distribute these equally. If it floats a little bit in the jar, it doesn't bother me, but I'm pretty sure I have enough to do these 2 jars pretty well. Now these ones are getting the tomato. I had leftover pork juice, and that's going to be canned as well, because then I have a pork stock. Because I do not have enough jars to fill my canner, I can show you that as well. Now these I can tell that they are the tomato. I don't have to mark these right away because I'll know when they come out. All right, so now I have this extra pork broth. Probably have about 1 jar. And like I said, I don't waste anything. I take my strainer. I set it on top. I grab my ladle. I don't care if there's a little bit of sediment at the bottom. That does not hurt my feelings at all. This was the natural juices that came out of this pork. Remember, there was no water in here. Once it cools in the jar, it's going to look funny. It's going to be a little gelatinous. And if you know that ahead of time, you don't worry. Now, any fat, when you open it, there is a layer here. Let me see if I can show you. There will be a layer of fat here. And I'm going to take that back down a little bit, try to get some of that fat off of there, because your jar will definitely not seal if you've got fat on the rim. Okay, one more. All right, so now I know that the fat is not going to interfere, hopefully, with my seal. Let me find a ring here. Tighten, loosen into the canner. Add just enough of that pork broth to get another half pint. When I put these in here, the half pints were underwater. So I had to use my ladle, of course I washed it off, to ladle out water because they will not get the proper processing if the water is over the top of your half pints. I brought that water up to that 1 inch mark or just a hair above by adding some water like this. I don't want it to go over the top, but remember I have to have enough for processing, okay? In here you will also see a filler jar. It has water in it. I don't bother to cap it because I'm not canning the water, but it keeps all of my jars nice and upright, and it keeps everything from wanting to, sometimes they'll tip over and you'll lose, your product because it didn't seal and may have spilled out. The next step is, as usual with all pressure canning, I'm going to put the pressure can lid on top. I'm going to turn this on high until I see, if I hear it rattling too much, I turn it down to medium high. Then I have to vent. You'll have that little spout that comes out of your canner. You need to vent that for 10 minutes before you add your weight. Okay, I think you can see very carefully, if you look very close, there's that steady stream of steam coming out of my vent there. I set my timer for 10 minutes, and once the 10 minutes is done, then I put my weight on. You have to wait for it to start jiggling, and then you start your timing process. I want to discuss your weight or your rocker briefly here. You can see mine is at a constant little jiggle, and this is where I like mine. Technically it says it should do this 4 times every minute, but because I'm busy, I'm cleaning my living room, I like to hear it constant, okay? Now, if you have a rocker, it should gently be going back and forth. Those of you with the dial gauge, do whatever your manufacturer says, but regardless of what they say, I like to see that little rocker going back and forth, okay? The other thing I want to discuss is the type of stove you have. If you have a flat top stove, most manufacturers recommend not canning on top of them. I know a lot of people who do, but I would never do the large where you can double stack your jars. That would be a lot of weight. Listen to your manufacturer. You can buy burners or stoves that you can do separately off of your stove. I have a propane stove. I know when I get to this point where I see just the tips of the yellow flames on this burner, I have to have them a little bit higher. I will get that constant jiggle. Excuse me. If you're on an electric stove, in the beginning, when you're adjusting your temperature to get that, this or the gentle rock, give it a minute in between before you start your timing to make sure your rocker or your jiggler is still working. Because if it stops, then you have to start your timing process all over. So, it could take 3-5 minutes to get it where you want it adjusted, and then you start your timer. Remember, pints and smaller are 75 minutes for meats, and quarts, and that one that's between a pint and a quart goes for 90 minutes. At the full rock or noise that you're hearing, if it stops for more than a minute or even a minute, you have to start the process all over again. I just want you to do this safe so that you know what to do. The last thing I want to talk about on this canner, there is a gasket. that goes between your lid and your canner. The gasket needs to be soft and pliable. I like to wipe my rims off of the canner. I like to take the gasket out each time. I make sure it's completely clean. I'll take some warm water and wipe it down really good to make sure that by some chance something didn't get between that gasket. They're easy to find online. This particular canner happens to be from the 1950s. So what's that, 70 years old? And I can still find the gaskets online quite easy. So make sure that you know how your canner works and the different things that you need to be aware of. There are canners that don't use a gasket, like the All-American. Then all you do is oil the top of the pan and under the lid, and that helps to make the seal. So once this is done, we'll come back and we'll discuss the final phase of this. All right, my timer just went off, and now I'm going to turn the heat off completely. The heat is off. It's going to, jiggle for a minute or two, or a few seconds anyway. Now comes the part where you can leave your house. You can do what you need to do. You need to let this come down naturally on its own. Don't play with the weight. Don't, do one of these. I just got it jiggling, but don't lift it up because you could cause a lot of siphoning. That means you could suck all the liquid out of your meat into the canner and it makes a mess. Siphoning can happen regardless, so don't panic if it does. As long as your jar is halfway full of liquid, you're safe. But that's why I don't run it at full blast either, because I noticed in my canner I get siphoning. I may still get some, but I'm not going to worry. Now I can walk away from this safely. I don't move the canner. It stays right where it is. And then once, I can touch the outside, I'll very gently touch the weight. If there's no steam coming out or you don't hear the little hiss, then I remove my weight. Wait for 3-5 minutes, whatever, and then I will open the top and remove my jars. So the canning process is done at this point, and we'll take a quick look at the finished product. All right, here are my jars. It took a good 3.5 hours before the temperature completely came down on these jars. And as I'm pulling them out, you can see they're still bubbling, and that happens quite a lot. That's going to help get any excess air out of your jars and let them seal. So I just wanted you to see that everything is done. Hopefully they all seal. There's always the event that something's not going to seal. And in that case, you have the choice of taking it out of the jars or recanning with a different lid, or eating it right away. Sorry, I know this is kind of crazy, but there you go. All my jars are done. Sorry about the dishwasher noise, but like I said, it took about 3.5 hours for the pressure to come all the way down. And now I have some shelf-stable pork and some broth. I'll let you know in the comments whether I had any issues with anybody sealing, but I wait at least 2 to 3 hours before I make that determination. Anyway, I hope you had a good view of how to pressure can meat. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. Otherwise, you guys have a wonderful day.